With my mate Dave working at an oil field in the middle of the Omani desert, I took the opportunity to hook up with him for some Arabian birding. The whole trip was less than a fortnight, and I started on my own in the south of the country, birding around Salalah in Dhofar province. The Salalah area is unusual in that it is the only place in the entire Arabian Peninsula that is affected by the monsoon season, and the Dhofar Mountains form a green and fertile crescent around the city, as can be seen on this Google Earth map. While in Salalah, I spent my time birding in the valleys, or wadis, of the mountains, and also at various locations along the coast, between Mirbat in the east and Mugsail in the west. I also spent a day further afield, travelling northwest to the oasis village of Mudai, in search of an unusual bird, and then the Queen of Sheba. With good grazing in the mountains, it soon became clear that a major road hazard were large groups of roaming cattle. However, I soon realised that an even bigger hazard existed. Major hazard of driving in Oman, camels in the road. And you gotta be careful in case one of them gets the ump. Ha ha! Boom boom! Hey! Right, this is called camel slalom. We go past you, and then we go past you, and we're sorted. My first birding stop was at the coastal town of Taka, where some greater flamingos were finding enough to eat in some tidal pools on the beach. I hadn't expected, though, to have a shot of a citrine wagtail with the beak of a greater flamingo. After the flamingos, the wagtail decided to hang out with some stints and a little ringed plover on the beach. Further up the beach, a large flock of gulls turned out to be mostly Hughlings gulls, with a single Caspian tern and a Caspian gull. Up and away from the beach, some rough ground gave me a close encounter with an Isabelline wheatear. It was then time for a bit of archaeology, as I reached the abandoned city and an artist's impression of Sumhumran, overlooking the lagoon of Khor Rori. The founding of the city in 1 BC was closely associated with the rising importance of sea trade between the Mediterranean and India, and allowed the then Hadramut kingdom to control the export of valuable local commodities such as frankincense. Sumhumran is considered the precursor to Salalah and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. My first night was spent in the town of Mirbat, where the local houses all struck me as being very nice and all built to look like mini castles. My hotel also looked quite palatial from a distance, but the local luxury goods store rather let the side down, and is currently being investigated under the Omani Trades Description Act. The reason for coming out to Mirbat was to do some early morning sea watching in the hope of seeing Persian shearwater and Juanin's petrel. But all I got was a dead green turtle. Actually, I did see 2 of the shearwaters but no petrels, while a western reef heron and some sooty gulls kept me company for a couple of hours. I was still up and away from the hotel by 9 in the morning and headed to a big hole in the mountains. This was the Tawi Attar sinkhole, 211 metres deep. I was here for 2 birds, nesting Bonelli's eagle and the unremarkable but very local Yemen serin. The Benelli's eagle was very obliging, and there were a few other nice birds around as well. However, I could not find any sign of the Yemeni contingent until I stumbled across more than 24 of them while heading back to the car after having given up. In order to make it up to me for hiding away for so long, I sat down and they hopped around my feet for close-up shots. Pity they are possibly the most boring-looking birds I have ever seen. Continuing on, I arrived at the Jabal Saman viewpoint, which overlooks the coastal plain from a height of 1,000 metres, and is a great place for watching raptors ride the thermals and updrafts. I saw quite a few raptor species, but not the hoped-for Vero's eagle, for which this site is renowned. Fan-tailed ravens also made the most of the updrafts, and Arabian wheatear and Tristram starling were permanently hanging around the car park, with one of the last species leaving me with a nice gift. Raptor watching over, I made my way back to Salalah, where I based myself for the next few days. En route, I saw my first blue-headed agama. This picture is from later in the trip, because my first glimpse of one was about 1 second before it head-butted my tyre at 50 miles an hour. I spent the evening in Salalah at the Al-Balid Archaeological Park, where house crows were building a nest amongst some more ruins. However, the star bird here is the spotted thickney, which I found in a small botanical garden within the park. The birds seemed quite used to humans and allowed close views. I did think it a shame, though, that the sign was for the fig tree behind the bird, and so I decided to rectify this in order that others might be drawn to seeing these birds. Unfortunately, I don't know the Arabic for thickney, so I just drew ahead. With migration in full swing, walking around the rest of this small suburban park was very enjoyable. An Indian pond heron was a nice find, but the thing that stood out most was the number of common sandpipers. I've never seen so many together in one place. There were around 400. I suppose if you are a common sandpiper on migration and you see a park bench, well, you may as well stop and put your feet up. Similarly, a large mixed flock of whiskered and white-winged black terns were also making use of the park's facilities, as were several greenshank. With darkness falling, I retired to my hotel, which conveniently overlooked a massive supermarket. This turned out to be the best supermarket I've ever been in. The decision was made easy by the fact that the people of Salalah had obviously knew I was coming, and so had put on British Week, especially for me. So, I loaded up with wagon wheels, sausage rolls and whatsits, ready for an early morning start. Well, I'm driving through the desert at about 6 in the morning, going to try and find a rare bird out here. Got about a 2-hour drive. And if I'm going to recommend one thing in this early stages of being in Oman, then I would suggest, if you are going on a long drive, bring your own tunes, because this is on the radio. And it sort of sounded like that for the last 15 minutes. Definitely bring your own tunes. I was heading to a small village called Mudai, only 30 miles from the border with war-torn Yemen. It was safe as houses though, and first thing in the morning I showed a local man and his young son hundreds of sandgrouse coming down to feed at a small pond. Up to 3 species come down here, but I only saw chestnut-bellied sandgrouse. Once these birds started to dwindle, I went in search for the star bird, a grey hippocoleus. I only found one bird, but it was a cracking male. This is a rare bird in Oman, with only a handful wintering in the country every year. It is also a unique bird, being the only member of its family. Its closest relatives are thought to be the waxwings. A bit more investigation of the vegetation in this oasis revealed a chiffchaff and a Nile Valley sunbird, which wasn't cooperative. I then moved into the local desert, which had quite a lot of the aptly named desert lark. I also stumbled across a very large Egyptian spiny-tailed lizard, which scuttled quickly into his lair. I continued north, finding a couple of shrike species, before ending up at a place called Shizir, where, in 2001, archaeologists discovered a buried city, which, it is claimed, is the fabled city of Ubar, with links to the Queen of Sheba. Apparently, the city walls got too heavy and fell into the cave below. There's a lot of debate about whether this is all a load of baloney, but the marketing worked, and now lots of tourists are driven over 2.5 hours out here from Salalah for a view of an unremarkable cave, which looked just like the lair of the spiny lizard I'd seen earlier. You'd think the Queen of Sheba could have done better for some overnight accommodation. The long journey back to Salalah was only interrupted by my curiosity as I stopped to check out a frankincense plantation. Being a man of Kent, to me, it just looked like a dead apple orchard. It was back to the beach the following morning for a trip to Mugsail in search of red-billed tropic birds, which was seen very, 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 very distantly. 5 ospreys fishing around the rocks were much easier to see, as were a pod of Indo-Pacific humpbacked dolphins. Moving away from the beach, I followed a wadi inland and managed to get up close again to a blue-headed agama, but without running it over. The wadi also had a nice selection of typical Omani birds. Back at Raysut, which is basically the port and industrial sector of Salalah, I got much better views of the tropic birds from the local lighthouse. I then realised that I'd been in Oman for 4 days, and so was obliged by my Omani birding visa to immediately visit a sewage farm. Raysut Sewage Farm was busy converting green sludge into brown sludge, or was it the other way around? Either way, it was to the liking of a hoopoe and a spur-winged plover, but unfortunately not much else. Around the corner though was the Raysut rubbish tip. Well, it'd be rude not to. The Raysut rubbish tip is renowned for the number of wintering steppe eagles, which can be over 1,000 birds. In March, the numbers have decreased markedly, but I estimated there were still over 100 birds, with a few imperial eagles and the odd greater spotted eagle. It also stunk to high heaven. That evening, for some unknown reason, I felt the need to reflect on street lighting in Oman. Here's another video while I drive, this time because I thought it was quite interesting in that driving around Oman, it seems that every single road that is maybe a B road and higher has street lights. It doesn't matter if it's only connecting to, I'd say, large villages. There's just street lights on every road. They can obviously afford the electricity, I suppose. I was actually on my way to a site called Ain Tobruk, where some woodland held a number of Dofar's specialities. I also came across a changeable lizard. However, the principal reason for coming here was to sit by a small waterhole and watch birds come down to drink, in the hope that the localised golden-winged grosbeak would make an appearance. As dusk approached, 2 birds eventually came down. Unfortunately, they were so quick they didn't make it into the camera, but they did make it onto the cover of the Birds of Oman. I also have no record of possibly my best sighting of the trip. Having decided to try to find some owls, I followed a rough track and stumbled across a striped hyena, almost in the pitch black. I had a bit of a lie-in the next morning, but made it back to the Jabal Saman viewpoint mid-morning to try again, without luck, for the Vero's eagle. It was quite nice to just enjoy the isolation and the view, but this was spoilt as a roar from a convoy of numerous 4x4s broke the silence. Around 50 German tourists then got out, took photos, and left as quickly as they'd arrived. I spent the afternoon at Wadi Darbat, which was quite scenic. I picked up new birds in the form of black-crowned chagra, Arabian warbler, and Bruce's pigeon, but only Bruce got his pigeon to pose for the camera. My final full day in the Salalah region started again at Mirbat for another unsuccessful sea watch alongside the gulls on the beach. After some scenic shots and a bit of herping around the harbour, I headed to Wadi Laga, avoiding a posse of goats going into the local supermarket on the way. Lying beneath Jabal Saman, this was my final attempt at the Vero's eagle, and I was at last successful, although the views were distant. I didn't see much else in this valley as the heat had got up, except a butterfly and an enormous desert locust. Heading back to Salalah via Mirbat again, I stopped off at Khor Steamer and found a nice selection of migrating waterbirds. My final evening was spent back beside the sea at Salalah's East Khor beach. When I arrived, the beach was empty. However, once again, I was suddenly inundated with people, but this time it wasn't German tourists. Well, on the radio here the other day was a report from the Asian Beach Football Championships, at which it was claimed Oman were one of the hot favourites, and they just won their quarter-final. Well, this is probably why this beach was deserted about half hour ago, and suddenly all these people, and most particularly all these cars, just all turned up and started playing beach football. Blimey. Thierry Henry's let himself go a bit. Opposite the football was the East Core Lagoon, and I was able to muscle my way into a parking spot right next to the water's edge to get some really good views of more water birds. More water birds were on the menu the next morning, as I made the most of a couple of spare hours before my flight to Muscat, spending time back at Raysut, at a small inlet and lagoon worryingly nestled against the expanding port. I wish I'd discovered this site earlier on, but a flock of Terek sandpipers was a nice way to finish this part of the trip. And with that, I headed to the airport, where a common miner checked my luggage and wished me well for my trip north.